got back up to his feet. Excellent. It's over. Unbelievable.
In 2004 in Japan, Pride FC launched a grand event for the entire MMA community. Just crazy in the composition of the participants in the Grand Prix in the heavyweight, in which 16 elite fighters took part, many of whom will remain in the memory of fans for more than a dozen years. Mirko Crocop, Kevin Rendelman, Mark Coleman, Sergey Kharitonov, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Sammy Schilt and of course Fedor Emelianenko, for whom this tournament was another chance to prove that he is the best heavyweight in the world. The first stage took place on April 25th at the Saitama Arena and was named Total Elimination. This tournament attracted serious attention, having gathered more than 42,000 spectators, and didn't leave them disappointed since absolutely all of the 8 fights of the first stage were completed ahead of time, and in this video we will remember each of them in detail. In the first bout, Kazuo Takahashi and Heath Herring met. For the Japanese, this was his debut in Pride, since before that he fought in Pancrase, where he established himself as a fighter with a steel will and character, and at the time of participation in Grand Prix he had 26 victories and 17 defeats. His rival at this stage was Heath Herring, nicknamed the Texas Crazy Horse, who with his charisma and outrageousness always knew how to attract the attention of the Japanese public.
His last victory coming against another participant in this tournament, against Gan.
In this fight, all disputes were resolved on the ground. At first, the Japanese controlled Heath from the back and hammered hard knees into the American's head. Then Herring himself carried out a takedown and almost lost with a guillotine, but the Japanese couldn't choke the horse, followed by a vendetta.
A couple of years ago in that thrilling title battle, he said this is it. Heath Herring is just knocked out.
Heath hammered Takahashi's head into the canvas with heavy hammer fists, while the fearless Japanese didn't even think to tap and patiently took all the blows until the referee himself intervened in the course of the fight. So Herring brutally knocked out the opponent in 5 minutes and became the first to advance to the next stage of the tournament. In the second fight of the evening, the audience saw the performance of Sergey Kharitonov, a paratrooper from Russia who was only at the beginning of his journey to MMA and had a record of 7-0, and Sergey had stopped all his rivals ahead of schedule before this battle. In the opposite corner of the ring, a Brazilian fighter from the Shooter Box Academy, Marila Hua, nicknamed the Ninja, was waiting for him, who in order to participate in this massive competition rapidly gained weight, but was still significantly inferior to the Russian in size.
Will try to take this one to the ground as quickly as possible. Here they go with that nervous energy in the early going. Tags him.
At the beginning of the fight, the fighters made an exchange in which they inflicted several heavy hits, but after a nice catch from Sergey, the fight went to canvas.
Very good job, and it looks like those body shots are starting to take their toll. That is staggered Marilla Ninja Hua. He's along the ropes and he's out.
Sergey finished the Brazilian at the 5th minute of the fight. One of Russian's blows seriously shocked Murillo, after which he had almost no chance of survival, and he was beautifully knocked out. So Sergey became the second fighter to pass to the next stage of the heavyweight Grand Prix, and he did it spectacular.
There you go. Feel like me.
Yeah, your people are small.
The third fight was marked by a real battle of the giants. In Japan they have always had a special attitude to this kind of freak fights. One of the guys was the giant Silva, whose height was 7.15 feet, and as a professional Olympian basketball player decided to try something new for himself. And at the time of the fight, Silva already had one fight with Heath Herring, which he lost by submission. His rival was Henry Miller, a sumo wrestler for whom this fight was his debut in MMA. At the same time, for two, the fighters weighed more than 660 pounds, and the difference between them was 84 pounds in favor of the giant Silva.
This is what he should do. He goes around his neck.
He could get the guillotine right here, good.
In this battle of the titans, Henry managed to transfer the Brazilian to the ground, but Silva, thanks to his reach, even lying on his back, was more dangerous. Henry decided to take a more advantageous position and switched to side control, But there he was in for a surprise in the form of a Kimura that the giant held and made the sumo wrestler tap. So in this fight between two big guys, Silva became luckier and stronger, who became the next lucky one to move further along the tournament grid. In the next battle, the audience again saw another giant, but much more recognizable and stellar in contrast to Silva. Sammy Schilt, a karate fighter, a kickboxer from Netherlands, who was nicknamed Hightower due to his height, 84 inches, and 2004 became the starting point for Schilt in K1, where he subsequently managed to win the World Grand Prix 4 times and inscribe his name in the history as one of the greatest kickboxers. Opposed to Sammy, another giant, nicknamed the Giant, Gan McGee, whose height was 82 inches and the record in MMA 12-3, while he fought Tim Sylvia for the championship title of UFC and lost, and then left for Japan. Being an excellent wrestler, Gan decided to seek happiness on the ground, where Sammy sometimes had problems. He managed to take a full mount and in a leisurely manner smashed the Dutch with hammer fists.
Now he's got it for the armbar, looking for the armbar. Salient point delivered, and it's over. Extends the arm.
But after 5 minutes of the fight, Sammy got out of a difficult position and held the armbar, which allowed Hightower to go to the next stage of the Grand Prix, where his rival became Sergey Kharitonov. In the fifth bout of the evening, Naoya Ogawa, the Japanese fighter who was the hope of all Japan, entered the ring. Ogawa had a brilliant judo career before his MMA debut. He was a silver medalist at the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, ranked 5th in the 1996 Olympics, and also brought Japan 7 World Championship medals, 4 of them gold and 3 bronze. This evening, in order to advance to the next stage of the Grand Prix, the Japanese had to eliminate the famous kickboxer Stefan Leko, who took a break from kickboxing and decided to try himself in MMA. At the very beginning of the fight, after exchanging blows, Ogawa sent Leko to the canvas with a powerful hit, and then tormented him a little there and carried a hand triangle. So this trip for the Japanese was quite simple, and he became the next one to make it to the second stage of the Grand Prix. Moreover, surprisingly, the draw determined him to be the rival of Giant Silva, the weakest participant at the second stage. I wonder if it was just a coincidence or someone contributed to this.
Like I said, if it stays on the feet, Crocop's gonna win. But if it goes down to the ground, I'm gonna win, and I'm gonna advance in this tournament. And don't be surprised if you don't see me in fucking the finals, because I don't think that I'm giving myself top billing. I think I'm that good.
Then came heavy artillery, in the form of a duel between Mirko Crocop Filipovic and former UFC champion the Monster Kevin Rendelman. Mirko by that time had already switched completely to MMA, leaving kickboxing for a while, and thanks to Fabricio Werdum, he did a good job of defending takedowns. So he approached this fight as a clear favorite, and his record in MMA was 9-1-2, while he lost only to Nogueira with an armbar. As for the Monster, he went on a streak of 2 defeats in a row to Quinton Jackson and Kazushi Sakuraba, so this fight was extremely important for Kevin.
Arena, anytime Mirko Crocop is in the ring, Kevin Rendelman.
From the very first seconds, the Monster rushed at Mirko, trying to transfer the Crow to the canvas, since his chances in the stands against Crocop were very weak.
Rendelman with the shot back up to his feet. Excellent. It's over. Unbelievable.
At the second minute of the fight, Mirko was caught to the snag of Kevin, who showed that he would go for a takedown, but in the style of Tyson, flew into the hand of Crocop with a left hook. Mirko fell into a knockdown, and Kevin, as a real predator, didn't give him the opportunity to recover and sent Crow to Nirvana. Mirko was one of the main favorites of the tournament, but the Monster created a historic upset and outplayed the dangerous knockout specialist while playing by his own rules.
But for you, I'll go to hell and heaven and back. I fight for you guys. I love you guys. Arigato gozaimasu. See you in 2 months.
In the penultimate duel of the evening, the Pride legend and future member of the UFC Hall of Fame, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, entered the ring. The Brazilian fighter was the first heavyweight champion in the organization, but after the arrival of Fedor Emelianenko, he lost him in a face-to-face meeting while losing by decision. Later, in a battle with Mirko Crocop, Nogueira became an interim champion, finishing Kroos with an armbar. In addition to the loss to Fedor, Nogueira lost only to Dan Henderson while having 21 victories in various tournaments and competitions. Undefeated Japanese wrestler and judoka with an overall record in MMA 10-0, Hirotaka Yokoi opposed the legendary Brazilian.
I haven't seen much of Yokoi, but I expect
In this fight, at first, events were going very slowly. The fight was a hard struggle, both in the clinch and on the ground, but at the end of the round, Nogueira already had an advantage due to his boxing. At the beginning of the second round, the Japanese tried to move Nogueira to the ground, but when trying to take down, he fell for an anaconda choke that was brightly executed. So Antonio was the first to win in the second round that evening, since before that all fights ended in the first. But most importantly, he went further, where his opponent was Heath Herring, whom he had previously beaten. In the main event of the evening, the champion, the last Emperor Fedor Emelianenko, turned up at the arena, who before signing for Pride also became the champion of Rings in 2001. And if you're interested, I can do a whole review dedicated to his fights in Rings. I'm waiting for your wishes in the comments, which I always read. So Fedor approached this tournament with a record of 17 wins and one annoying defeat in Rings from Tsuyoshi Kosaka. At the first stage of the tournament, his rival was the member of the Hall of Fame and the first UFC champion, heavyweight Mark Coleman, nicknamed the Hammer, who also won the 2000 Grand Prix in Pride.
Bringing to an end the first round of this tournament.
Fedor starts the attack with his windmill, but Mark takes him to the ground and enters the full mount, and then finds himself behind the back of the Lost Emperor, but Fedor slips out of Coleman's strong paws and performs the guillotine in a stance.
Alexander Emelianenko, his brother in Vladimir Goranov. He's got here's the armbar. And Coleman.
Mark was again able to transfer Fedor to the ground, but this second takedown was fatal and the last for him. Fedor caught Mark with an armbar and made him tap. Really nice victory, and the last Emperor goes to the next stage of the tournament, where Hammer's friend Kevin Rendelman became his rival. Although if Kevin hadn't created an upset in the fight with Mirko, perhaps we would have seen this super fight Fedor and Crocop much earlier. After 8 beautiful finishes that took place at the first stage of the Grand Prix, only 8 fighters remained in the title race. Fedor at the second stage went on Kevin Rendelman, Kharitonov on Schilt, Nogueira on Herring, and joined Silva on Ogawa. The quarterfinal fights took place at the arena on June 20, 2004, and attracted more than 43,000 spectators who came to support their idols, and especially Ogawa, who represented Japan. The evening opened with a very promising duel between two bright strikers. Paratrooper Sergey Kharitonov, who had already managed to demonstrate his power at the first stage of the tournament by sending Marila Ahua to a beautiful knockout, and the K1 legend Sammy Schilt, who like Kharitonov didn't bother judges of his fight and finished Gan McGee with an armbar also in the first round.
With Sergey Kharitonov squaring up.
At the beginning of the fight, the Dutch hammered a couple of power jabs into Sergey's head, and then tried to stop the opponent with a guillotine.
Trust me.
There's Kharitonov able to hit him again and again.
For about 6 minutes, Sergey tortured Schilt on the ground, while the entire face of the Dutchman was covered with blood from Kharitonov's blows. At the end of the last minute of the round, the referee decided that it was time to stop these beating, as Schilt was unable to defend himself because of hand blocked by Russian. So this way, Sergey finished his second rival and became the first semi-finalist of the tournament. The second to compete for the right to reach the semi-finals of the Grand Prix was Giant Silva, who in his first fight showed some skills on the ground by being able to finish sumo wrestler Henry Miller with Kimura, and after this victory his record in MMA became 1-1. But at the second stage, Silva's task was much more difficult, since he had to deal with the local favorite, Olympic judoka Naoya Ogawa, who came out by the frenzied support of the audience and in I Am Chicken t-shirt, while not even suspecting what a hype it would turn out to be after many years. The fight immediately went to the ground with the efforts of Ogawa, after which the Japanese controlled the giants on the floor and hammered heavy blows into his head from various positions. At the same time, having such a great advantage in size and strength, the giant didn't seem to try to get up and was taking punches until the referee intervened and stopped the fight by awarding the victory to a local fighter, who after Sergey Kharitonov went to the next stage of the Grand Prix. The next ticket to the semi-finals was to be played by the interim champion Rodrigo Nogueira, who in the first stage upset the Japanese public by choking the Japanese Hirotaka Yokoi with an anaconda, and Heath Herring, for whom it was a great opportunity to take revenge for the defeat to Nogueira at the Pride 17 tournament, when the judges unanimously gave the victory to the Brazilian. So Heath could fulfill two tasks at once, to become a semi-finalist of the Grand Prix and return the favor to Nogueira.
About the money, Father, isn't it?
Rampage, what do you think about this?
Heath began this fight very actively by firing low kicks at Nogueira, but after 2 minutes he was already lying on his back and taking punches from the Brazilian. Almost until the very end of the first round, the fighters were wrestling and Nogueira tried several times to end the fight with a submission, but Herring always got out of difficult situations.
Second round is now underway.
The second round was very similar to what happened in Nogueira's fight at the first stage. Heath attempted a takedown but was caught by an anaconda and was finished in the same manner as the Japanese wrestler. So the second anaconda in a row, and Nogueira goes to the semi-finals of the Grand Prix, where it has to face Sergey Kharitonov.
Bring him down, make it look like stay out of his range and make it look like you're looking to shoot on him. And sneak that bomb in there, man. Straight right hand or left hook, whatever.
Hey, when you see him lunge, man, unfucking cork that bomb.
In the last quarterfinals, the audience saw another epic confrontation that went down in the history of MMA, and every old lady on the block is aware of what happened there. In this duel came together the monster Kevin Rendelman, who finished Mirko Crocop and knocked out the favorite already at the first stage of the Grand Prix, and the champion, the last emperor, Fedor Emelianenko, who didn't care very well Kevin's friend Mark Coleman, submitting the hammer already in the first round with an armbar.
That's correct, and this bout is underway.
At the beginning of the battle, Kevin managed to take Fedor down, and when the Emperor tried to get back on his feet, he performed a suplex, after which the main question was how Fedor survived after such a fall with his neck to the canvas. Having survived the flight on the Monster Airlines, Fedor, as if nothing had happened, won the position and finished Kevin with a Kimura, and thereby showing an incredible comeback. After this fight, the semi-final pairs were formed, and Fedor got the Japanese Naoya Ogawa, Sergey Kharitonov got Nogueira, and in a certain scenario, two fighters from Russia could come together in the final. The semi-final and final fights took place just 2 months later at the Final Conflict tournament, which attracted 47,629 spectators, and they were very intrigued first of all by the duel of their idol Ogawa against Fedor. But it all started with a battle between Sergey Kharitonov and Nogueira, who had an excellent bout and no one wanted to concede since there was only one step left to the final.
Kharitonov considered a dark horse. Nogueira.
First half of the round went in a standing position, and then Nogueira managed to transfer Sergey to the ground, but he didn't succeed in keeping Kharitonov on the floor for a long time. In a few minutes until the end of the round, Nogueira again made a takedown and, controlling Sergey on the floor, struck, thereby taking the ending. In the second round, the fighters staged a firefight from long and medium distances, and Nogueira was a little more accurate than Kharitonov, thus taking the victory by unanimous decision of the judges, inflicting the first defeat on Sergey Kharitonov in the career, and interrupting his streak of 9 early victories in a row. Thus we have the first finalist, and it's very symbolic that it was Big Nog that became him, since he was the interim heavyweight champion. After identifying the first Grand Prix finalist, it was time to show up to the local fighter Naoya Ogawa, who had the opportunity to seriously declare himself and try to stop Fedor Emelianenko, who on his way had already demolished two first-class wrestlers and UFC champions Mark Coleman and Kevin Rendelman. So in this fight, Fedor was the favorite, but the support of the public pushed the Japanese to feet, and by his act he raised the degree even more before the fight with not shaking the Emperor's hand.
Super Arena, Ogawa refusing to touch gloves with...
At the very beginning of the fight, Fedor rolled on Ogawa with all the power of his sweeping bear punches, and then gave an armbar to the Olympic judoka, finishing it already in the first minute of the meeting and becoming the second finalist of the Grand Prix. Well, in this case, how not to say about karma, and that always and everywhere people should be treated with respect, even in such a bloodthirsty sport as MMA. Champion Fedor and interim champion Nogueira fought in the final for the unification of the belts and the title of the champion of the Grand Prix. At the same time, their first meeting, which took place at Pride 25, Fedor won by decision and took Nogueira's title. So this meeting had a real history of confrontation, and I believe they were the two strongest heavyweights in the world at the time, with all due respect to Crocop.
Emelianenko versus Nogueira, champion!
At the beginning, the fight moved to canvas and Fedor spent about 3 minutes in the guard of Nogueira, who was much better prepared for the opponent than in their first fight. In one of the episodes, the fighters unintentionally collided with their heads and Fedor has got a deep cut. The fight was stopped and the final received no contest. Such an expected event for the whole world of MMA, and it was such a huge disappointment. But they didn't end there. After the fight, Nogueira said that Fedor deliberately went to this clash, since he couldn't find the key to victory over the Brazilian, and Fedor in turn replied that what happened was more likely to play for Minotauro. Anyway, the Grand Prix needed a champion, and in 4 months this fight was arranged again.
The main event of Shockwave, it should be a classic.
Fedor's gameplay was now different from what we saw in the first two battles. He made excellent use of throws and takedowns, transferring the Brazilian to canvas, but at the same time tried not to go into Minotauro's guard, but decided to work more in a stance, where he succeeded.
In this fight, you guys. Nice takedown by Fedor. And a soccer kick.
In trouble getting Emelianenko at all.
Yep. And there it is again.
Every time they get close, he gets slung to the mat.
Nogueira throughout the fight didn't give up attempts to take Fedor down, but he clearly stuck to his plan and worked in a stance. And even when the Brazilian managed to transfer the fight to the ground, his jiu-jitsu didn't help him to turn the tide of the meeting and take the victory in this fight.
Unanimous decision for Fedor.
This way, Fedor by the second try managed to beat Nogueira by the judges' decision and became the heavyweight Grand Prix champion and united the belts. The domination of the Last Emperor continued, and the victory over the Pick Minotauro at that time valued very high, since in his entire Pride career he lost only to Fedor twice and by split decision to Josh Barnett. This is how the Grand Prix of Pride of 2004 turned out, which was remembered for many bright fights and battles, and they have already become a real classic of MMA. And if you like this format, then write which Grand Prix you would like to see on my channel, since there were a lot of such tournaments in Pride and each of them deserves attention. There was definitely something to see. If you liked the video, support it by liking and subscribing, also press the bell to stay in touch and not to miss out on fresh videos.